The town of Ravenwood, South Carolina, was a picture-perfect slice of American charm. Nestled between dense forests and a winding river, it was a place where time seemed to stand still. Cobblestone streets connected rows of colonial-style homes, and every Sunday morning, the sound of church bells rang out from St. Mary's, a towering stone cathedral at the heart of the town. For the people of Ravenwood, St. Mary's was more than a place of worship, it was a sanctuary, a symbol of unity and faith. At the center of it all was Father Matthew, a man revered by the community for his unwavering kindness and compassion. At 45, he had spent 2 decades serving as the town's spiritual guide. His sermons, delivered with conviction and warmth, filled the pews every week, and his gentle demeanor drew people to him for comfort and counsel. Yet, behind the solemn figure draped in clerical robes, Father Matthew carried a heavy burden. Beneath his devout exterior was a man quietly grappling with loneliness and the relentless weight of expectations. Father Matthew's days were a predictable routine of prayers, charity work, and tending to his congregation. But his nights were restless, haunted by questions he could never speak aloud. Was this truly his calling? Had he sacrificed too much for the life of a priest? These doubts lingered in the shadows, a private torment he could not escape. One spring afternoon in May 2022, a new presence entered Ravenwood. Anna Collins, a young widow in her early 30s, moved into a small, weathered house on the edge of town with her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. To outsiders, Anna seemed like a woman seeking a fresh start, her polite demeanor masking any signs of the pain she carried. But those who looked closer might catch glimpses of her sorrow, how her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she avoided questions about her past. Her husband, David Mitchell, had died under mysterious circumstances less than a year earlier. The official cause was ruled an accident, but whispers of foul play had followed Anna ever since. Unable to bear the scrutiny of her late husband's powerful family in Charleston, she fled to Ravenwood, hoping to leave behind both her grief and the accusations. Anna's first visit to St. Mary's was unremarkable at first glance. She sat quietly in a pew at the back of the church, her hands clasped tightly together as she bowed her head in prayer. But Father Matthew noticed her almost immediately. There was something in her posture, a fragility that seemed at odds with the strength she was trying to project. After the service, she approached him hesitantly. "Father," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I was hoping you could help me." He listened as she explained her struggles, how she was trying to rebuild her life for the sake of her daughter. Her words were careful, guarded, but Father Matthew could sense the depth of her pain. He agreed to meet with her for counseling, assuring her that the church was a place where she could find solace. As weeks passed, Anna began to frequent St. Mary's. Their conversations grew more personal, touching on the heartache of her husband's death and the difficulties of being a single mother in a new town. For Father Matthew, these talks became a respite from his own isolation, a connection he hadn't realized he craved. But neither of them could have foreseen how that connection would evolve, nor the dark consequences it would bring. For in Ravenwood, secrets had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they were buried. At first, their meetings seemed harmless, even necessary. Anna would visit Father Matthew in his modest office at St. Mary's after Sunday services. She would sit in the worn wooden chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she spoke of her struggles. The conversations began with surface-level topics, her challenges adjusting to the small-town life of Ravenwood, her daughter Lily's difficulty making friends at the local school, the loneliness that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Father Matthew listened intently, his calm voice offering reassurance and advice rooted in faith. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, their conversations began to take on a different tone. Anna began to trust him with pieces of her past she had never shared with anyone in Ravenwood. David wasn't kind, she admitted one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. She stared at the floor, avoiding Father Matthew's gaze. He could be controlling, manipulative, sometimes worse. Father Matthew's brows knitted together as he leaned forward. "Did he hurt you, Anna?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her silence speaking volumes. When she finally nodded, the weight of her confession seemed to hang in the air between them. "It's why his family hates me," she added, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They think I'm lying about everything. That I'm the reason he's gone." Father Matthew felt a surge of protectiveness he couldn't quite explain. He reassured her that no one had the right to judge her, that she deserved a chance to move forward without the burdens of the past. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, she felt seen, understood. Their meetings became more frequent. Anna would sometimes stop by the church on weekdays when Lily was at school. Father Matthew found himself looking forward to these visits more than he cared to admit. Her presence was like a balm for the restlessness that had plagued him for years. For Anna, his unwavering support was a lifeline, something solid to cling to as she navigated her new life. But as their bond deepened, subtle changes began to take place. Their conversations, once strictly focused on Anna's struggles, began to shift toward more personal topics. Father Matthew found himself sharing stories from his own life, his childhood in a strict Catholic household, his early days as a young priest, the sacrifices he had made along the way. "There are days I wonder if I made the right choice," he admitted once, his gaze fixed on the cross hanging on the wall. "If I gave up too much." Anna studied him carefully. "You're human, Father," she said softly. "You're allowed to have doubts." Her words, meant as comfort, struck a chord deeper than she realized. For the first time, Father Matthew allowed himself to consider the possibility that he wasn't as steadfast as he had always believed. It was during one of these conversations that something shifted irreversibly. They were sitting in the small garden behind the church, where wildflowers grew in untamed clusters. Anna had been laughing at a story Father Matthew shared, a rare moment of levity between them. When their laughter faded, a silence settled, but it wasn't the comfortable kind they had shared before. Her eyes lingered on his, and he felt it, a pull, an unspoken tension that neither of them dared to name. He quickly looked away, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. From that moment on, their meetings carried an undercurrent of something unspoken but undeniable. Father Matthew tried to rationalize it, telling himself that his connection with Anna was simply a reflection of his duty to provide comfort and guidance. But deep down, he knew better. The way his heart quickened at the sound of her voice, the way his gaze lingered on her as she left his office, these were not feelings a priest was supposed to have. Anna, too, began to sense the shift. She found herself seeking him out not just for advice but for the warmth and understanding he offered. His kindness felt like a lifeline, and the quiet thrill of their growing closeness was something she hadn't felt in years. Their conversations became less guarded, their moments together tinged with a quiet intensity. A brush of hands as he handed her a cup of tea. The way their eyes met and lingered just a little too long. They told themselves it was innocent, that their connection was purely emotional. But both knew the line between priest and parishioner had begun to blur. The meetings continued, now in more secluded places, quiet corners of the church, the garden, or even the dimly lit basement where old furniture and forgotten relics were stored. The secrecy added an edge of forbidden excitement, a feeling neither of them could entirely resist. What had started as a lifeline for Anna and a duty for Father Matthew was becoming something else entirely. Neither of them could articulate it, but the truth was undeniable, they were crossing into dangerous territory. As summer turned to autumn, the atmosphere in Ravenwood began to shift. The once warm sunlight grew cooler, and whispers of falling leaves heralded the approach of change. But the most dramatic changes were happening not in the seasons but in the shadows of Anna Collins' life. Her quiet escape to this small town was no longer as secure as she had hoped. The first tremors came in the form of a phone call. Caroline Mitchell, Anna's sister-in-law and the eldest daughter of the prominent Mitchell family in Charleston, had never been able to accept her brother's sudden death. Officially, David Mitchell had died in a tragic accident, slipping and falling down the grand staircase of the Mitchell estate. But Caroline had always harbored suspicions about Anna. To her, the widow's calm demeanor at the funeral had seemed less like grief and more like guilt. When Anna left Charleston shortly after the funeral, Caroline became convinced that she was running from something. It wasn't just about David, it was about protecting the Mitchell family's name. Determined to uncover the truth, Caroline hired a private investigator, Michael Grant, to track Anna's movements and uncover any secrets she might be hiding. It didn't take long for Michael to find her in Ravenwood. Small towns were not places where people could easily disappear. Anna's visits to St. Mary's Church quickly became the focus of his investigation. While most saw her meetings with Father Matthew as innocuous, Michael noticed something different: the frequency of her visits, the way she lingered after everyone else had left, and the fact that these meetings often extended well into the evening. He took photographs from a distance, Anna entering the church through the back garden, Father Matthew escorting her to her car under the dim light of the church's lanterns. Individually, the moments meant nothing. But together, they told a story. Meanwhile, Anna began to sense that she was being watched. It started with small things: a shadow lingering too long outside her home, a stranger loitering near the school where Lily attended. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, a lingering effect of her troubled past. But one morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. The message was typed, the tone cold and threatening. "You can't hide forever. The truth always comes out." Anna's hands trembled as she read the words. She didn't need to guess who had sent it. Caroline's disdain for her had always been thinly veiled. But now, Anna realized, Caroline wasn't just angry, she was hunting for something. Desperate for guidance, Anna confided in Father Matthew. Sitting across from him in his office, her voice cracked as she revealed more of her story than she had ever intended. David wasn't the man everyone thought he was, she admitted, her eyes filled with anguish. He controlled every part of my life. Where I went, who I saw, even what I wore. And when I tried to stand up for myself, he made me regret it. Father Matthew leaned forward, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Did he hurt you, Anna?" he asked gently. Anna nodded, her expression hollow. It wasn't just words or threats. It was physical. It was constant. And his family, they turned a blind eye. They only cared about appearances. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The night he died, we argued. He'd been drinking, and he was furious about something trivial, something I said at dinner. He lost his balance at the top of the stairs. I tried to catch him, but..." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to finish the sentence. Father Matthew reached out, placing a comforting hand over hers. "You didn't push him," he said, his voice firm but kind. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of belief. Anna's lip quivered as she nodded. But Caroline doesn't care. She needs someone to blame, and I'm the easiest target. Unbeknownst to them, Michael Grant was piecing together his own version of events. Armed with photographs, notes, and Caroline's unrelenting determination, he prepared to escalate his findings. He believed he had stumbled upon something far more scandalous than Caroline had anticipated. What had started as an investigation into Anna's possible involvement in her husband's death had now expanded to include her relationship with Father Matthew. For Caroline, this new angle was perfect ammunition. It wasn't just about justice for David anymore, it was about destroying Anna's credibility completely. If the town of Ravenwood learned about Anna's connection to their beloved Father Matthew, it would ruin her. And Caroline planned to make sure everyone knew. As the walls closed in, Anna found herself trapped in a web of her past and her present. She had trusted Father Matthew, but now their connection made her more vulnerable than ever. And in the shadows, Caroline and Michael waited for the perfect moment to strike, unaware that the truth they sought would unravel more than just Anna's life, it would tear apart the entire community of Ravenwood. The once comforting bond between Anna Collins and Father Matthew had begun to strain under the weight of unspoken desires, guilt, and external threats. What had started as a lifeline for Anna was now a source of conflict, and for Father Matthew, a sense of duty had twisted into something far more complicated. As the chill of November settled over Ravenwood, the cracks in their fragile connection deepened. Anna's world was closing in on her. The threatening letter from Caroline Mitchell, the silent stalking presence of Michael Grant, and the whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere she went had pushed her into a corner. But it was Father Matthew's indecision that hurt her the most. She had grown to rely on his unwavering support, his steady voice telling her she wasn't alone. Yet now, as their relationship became more entangled, his hesitation felt like betrayal. One cold evening, Anna arrived at St. Mary's earlier than usual. The church was empty, its vast halls illuminated by the dim glow of flickering candles. She found Father Matthew in his office, his shoulders hunched as he stared at a half-written sermon. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his normally calm demeanor frayed. "We need to talk," Anna said, her voice sharp, breaking the silence. He looked up, startled by the urgency in her tone. "Of course," he said, gesturing for her to sit. But Anna remained standing, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "This can't keep going like this," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I can't keep sneaking around, hiding every time someone looks my way. You've been my only anchor, Matthew, but now it feels like you're slipping away." Father Matthew's heart sank at the pain in her voice. He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "I can't do this alone," she continued. "You say you care about me, but when it matters, you pull back. I've given you everything, and all I'm asking is for you to choose me. To leave all of this behind and start over, with me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Father Matthew leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together as he tried to steady himself. He had known this moment was coming, but no amount of preparation could soften the blow. "Anna," he began carefully, "I do care about you, more than I should. But what you're asking, it's not that simple." "Not that simple," she snapped, her voice rising. "What's so complicated about it? You're miserable here, locked in this place, pretending to be someone you're not. You've told me that yourself." Father Matthew stood, his calm exterior cracking under the weight of her accusations. "It's not that I don't want to be with you," he said, his voice firm but laced with anguish. "It's that I can't. My vows, my faith, they're not just words to me. They're who I am." Anna's expression hardened. "Are they more important than me? Than us?" "It's not about choosing one over the other," he said desperately. "It's about doing what's right. And this, whatever this is, it's not right." The words hit Anna like a blow. She turned away, her hands shaking as she fought back tears. "So that's it," she said bitterly. "You'd rather stay here, hiding behind your faith, than take a chance at real happiness?" Father Matthew stepped toward her, his hand reaching out but stopping short. "Anna, please. You mean more to me than you know, but not enough," she finished for him, her voice cold. Their argument marked a turning point. Anna began to pull away emotionally, her once deep trust in Father Matthew eroded by what she saw as cowardice. She continued to visit the church, but her presence was colder, her conversations with him guarded and tense. Meanwhile, Father Matthew was consumed by guilt. Every word he spoke from the pulpit felt hollow, his once revered sermons now lifeless echoes of the faith he was struggling to hold on to. He found himself avoiding the very people he had once cared for most, afraid that they would see through him to the conflicted man he had become. Adding to the tension, the whispers around Ravenwood were growing louder. Linda Harris, a longtime parishioner, had noticed Anna leaving the church late at night on more than one occasion. Though she said nothing at first, her suspicions were unmistakable. By the time her concerns reached the ears of others in the community, they had morphed into full-blown rumors. For Anna, the mounting pressure was unbearable. She began to lash out in private moments with Father Matthew, accusing him of abandoning her when she needed him most. Her once polite demeanor cracked, revealing the desperation and anger simmering beneath the surface. "You're just like them," she spat during one heated exchange. "Like David. Like Caroline. All of you just want to control me, to keep me in my place." "That's not fair," Father Matthew replied, his voice breaking. "I've done everything I can for you, Anna." "Everything except what matters," she shot back. "You want to protect your reputation, your image as the perfect priest, more than you want to protect me." Their arguments left them both emotionally drained, their bond unraveling under the weight of unmet expectations and conflicting loyalties. For Anna, Father Matthew's refusal to choose her felt like the ultimate betrayal. For Father Matthew, each confrontation brought him closer to the edge, his carefully constructed world threatening to collapse entirely. As their connection frayed, neither of them could see the storm gathering on the horizon. Caroline's plan to expose Anna was nearing fruition, and Michael Grant had uncovered enough evidence to set the stage for a scandal that would rock the foundations of Ravenwood. The question was no longer whether their secrets would come to light, but when. The first whispers of scandal in Ravenwood started small, like faint ripples on the surface of a still pond. A hushed conversation in the church vestibule. A knowing glance exchanged between neighbors. But in a town as tightly knit as Ravenwood, it didn't take long for those ripples to swell into waves. It began when Linda Harris, a devoted parishioner, noticed Anna leaving St. Mary's late one evening. Her suspicions had been growing for weeks, Anna's frequent visits, the way she lingered in the garden or slipped into Father Matthew's office when no one else was around. But that night, as Linda watched Anna exit the church's back door, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of the lanterns, something clicked. It wasn't just pastoral counsel. There was something else happening. Linda didn't confront anyone directly, she didn't have to. By the time Sunday Mass rolled around, the congregation was buzzing with speculation. Conversations grew quieter when Father Matthew entered the room, and Anna's once anonymous presence in the back pew felt like it was under a spotlight. The warmth of the church was replaced with an undercurrent of suspicion, its sacred walls no longer a refuge for either of them. As the rumors spread, Caroline Mitchell seized her opportunity. Her investigator, Michael Grant, had gathered enough evidence to add fuel to the fire, photographs of Anna entering and leaving the church at odd hours, notes documenting her meetings with Father Matthew. Caroline presented the information to key figures in Ravenwood, couching her intentions as concern for the community's moral integrity. "This is not about vengeance," she said with a performative sigh. "It's about ensuring that the church, and Father Matthew, remain above reproach." It wasn't long before the whispers reached the ears of the diocesan council. A formal inquiry was launched, and Father Matthew was summoned to explain himself. Sitting in a cold, impersonal room surrounded by stern-faced clerics, he felt the walls of his carefully constructed life closing in. They asked about Anna, their meetings, and the nature of their relationship. He denied any wrongdoing but couldn't hide the strain in his voice. Father Matthew, one of the council members, said gravely, "Even the appearance of impropriety is enough to damage the church's reputation. You must step down until this matter is resolved." Meanwhile, Anna found herself the target of growing hostility in Ravenwood. People she had once exchanged polite nods with on the street now avoided her entirely. A trip to the grocery store left her feeling exposed, the weight of judgment pressing down on her with every whispered word and sideways glance. One afternoon, as Anna sat in her small, dimly lit kitchen, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Caroline Mitchell stood there, her presence as imposing as ever. In her hand was an envelope, thick with papers. "Your time here is over," Caroline said, her voice low and venomous. She handed Anna the envelope. "If you don't leave Ravenwood, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are." Anna opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of the photographs Michael had taken, along with a summary of his findings. But what struck her most was a letter at the bottom of the stack, a statement from the Mitchell family formally accusing her of responsibility for David's death. "You think this will scare me?" Anna said, her voice shaking with defiance. "I don't need to scare you," Caroline replied coldly. "I just need the truth to come out." For Anna, the walls were closing in. She turned to Father Matthew for solace, but he, too, was unraveling under the weight of his guilt. Their meetings, once a source of comfort, had become charged with tension and despair. "They're forcing me to step down," he confessed during one of their final conversations. His eyes were hollow, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've believed in, it's slipping away." Anna stared at him, her own pain momentarily eclipsed by anger. "And what about me?" she demanded. "Do you think I'm not losing everything too? I trusted you, Matthew. I gave you everything I had left, and now you're just going to let them destroy us?" Her words cut deep, but Father Matthew had no answer. He had spent years preaching about sacrifice and faith, but now, as his world crumbled around him, he found himself paralyzed by fear. The final blow came on a Sunday morning, just as Mass was about to begin. As the congregation gathered in the pews, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone, no one knew who, had left copies of Michael's photographs on the steps of the church. The images of Anna and Father Matthew together were unmistakable. By the time Father Matthew stepped up to the pulpit, the air in the room was thick with tension. He looked out at the faces of his parishioners, some filled with disappointment, others with quiet anger. For the first time in his career, he found himself unable to speak. The words he had prepared for his sermon felt hollow, meaningless. After a long, agonizing silence, he stepped down and left the church without a word. Anna, watching from the back of the room, felt her heart shatter. She had lost everything, her sanctuary, her trust in Father Matthew, and any hope of starting over in Ravenwood. But as the whispers grew louder and the town turned against her, a dark resolve began to take shape within her. If the town was determined to destroy her, she wouldn't go quietly. For Ravenwood, the scandal had only just begun. But for Anna and Father Matthew, the secrets they had fought so hard to protect had already sealed their fates. The storm was here, and there was no escaping its path. The air in Ravenwood grew heavier with every passing day. The scandal that had once been whispered in hushed tones now consumed the town, leaving no corner untouched. Father Matthew had retreated into isolation, unable to face his congregation or the accusations that had dismantled his carefully constructed life. Anna Collins, once seeking refuge in Ravenwood, now found herself suffocating under the weight of judgment and betrayal. It was a cold November evening when everything came to a head. The night sky hung low with dark clouds, casting the town in an eerie, oppressive silence. Anna sat in her small living room, staring blankly at the fire that crackled in the hearth. In her lap was the envelope Caroline Mitchell had delivered days earlier, its contents spilling over like wounds she could not close. The photographs, the accusations, the venomous letter, it all burned in her mind, igniting a storm of anger and despair. Her thoughts drifted to Father Matthew. He had been her anchor, her solace, her hope. But now, he felt like a stranger, consumed by his own guilt and paralyzed by the expectations of his faith. The memory of their last conversation played over in her head, his hollow eyes, his faltering voice, his inability to choose her. She had begged him to stand with her, to fight for her, but he had only offered silence. She couldn't take it anymore. Anna grabbed her coat and stormed out into the night, the cold biting at her skin as she made her way to St. Mary's. The church stood silent and imposing, its grand facade now a shadow of the sanctuary it had once been. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside, the familiar scent of candle wax and old wood enveloping her. The only light came from the flickering candles on the altar, casting long, wavering shadows across the pews. She found Father Matthew in his office, hunched over his desk. Papers were scattered around him, but he wasn't reading them. His hands were clasped tightly together, his lips moving in silent prayer. When he heard her enter, he looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and dread. "Anna," he said quietly, rising to his feet. "You shouldn't be here." Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't just shut me out, Matthew. Not after everything we've been through." "I'm trying to protect you," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "This has gone too far. If we don't stop now, it will destroy us both." "It already has," she cried, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Do you think they'll just forgive you and forget about me? They won't stop until they've ruined us completely." Father Matthew shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I made a mistake, Anna. I let my emotions cloud my judgment. But this has to end." His words struck her like a physical blow. The anger she had been holding back erupted, raw and unfiltered. "You're a coward," she spat. "You've preached about sacrifice and faith your entire life, but when it comes down to it, you're just protecting yourself. You don't care about me. You never did." "That's not true," he said, his voice breaking. "You mean more to me than you'll ever know. But I can't abandon my faith. I can't abandon who I am." Tears streamed down Anna's face as her hands clenched into fists. "And what about who I am? What about what I've given up for you? I trusted you, Matthew. I loved you." The silence that followed was deafening. Father Matthew looked away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. In that moment, something inside Anna snapped. The anger, the betrayal, the despair, it all surged forward, blinding her to everything else. Her hand reached out, grabbing the heavy brass crucifix that lay on his desk. "You don't get to leave me like this," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Before either of them could fully comprehend what was happening, the crucifix came down, striking him across the temple. Father Matthew staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. Blood trickled down his face as he collapsed to the floor, the sound of his body hitting the stone tiles echoing through the room. Anna froze, the crucifix slipping from her trembling hands. She stared down at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Panic set in. She stumbled out of the office, her footsteps echoing in the empty church. By the time the parishioners arrived for morning mass, they found Father Matthew's lifeless body sprawled across the floor, surrounded by the papers he had been working on the night before. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The police launched an investigation, piecing together the events leading up to Father Matthew's death. Witnesses spoke of Anna's strained relationship with him, her increasing desperation, and her history of conflict with the Mitchell family. When the investigators found Anna's fingerprints on the crucifix, she became their prime suspect. Caroline Mitchell, seizing her opportunity, fed the narrative that Anna was a manipulative, dangerous woman who had brought ruin to everyone around her. But as the investigation unfolded, darker truths emerged. It was revealed that Caroline had been withholding critical evidence about David's death, a financial motive tied to the Mitchell estate. Anna's claims of David's abusive behavior were corroborated by former employees of the Mitchell household, painting a more complex picture of the family's dynamics. In the end, Anna was arrested while attempting to flee the state. During her confession, she spoke of the pain, betrayal, and desperation that had led to her actions. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said through tears. "I just wanted him to choose me." The town of Ravenwood was left reeling. Father Matthew, once a symbol of faith and integrity, had been undone by his humanity. Anna, a woman seeking refuge, had found only destruction. And the Mitchell family, whose secrets had set these events in motion, now faced the public scrutiny. The tragedy left an indelible mark on the town, a reminder of the consequences of buried emotions and unspoken truths. For those who remained, the story of Father Matthew and Anna Collins was a cautionary tale, a warning of how far people could fall when love, guilt, and desperation collided. And in the quiet, empty halls of St. Mary's, the echoes of their story lingered, a haunting presence that refused to be silenced. The events at St. Mary's Church left an unshakable scar on the quiet town of Ravenwood. The once beloved Father Matthew, known for his compassion and steadfast faith, became a symbol of the destructive power of hidden desires and unspoken struggles. Anna Collins, who arrived seeking refuge and redemption, instead found herself at the center of tragedy, forever tied to the scandal that would haunt the community for years. In the days following Father Matthew's death, Ravenwood became a town divided. Some mourned the priest as a flawed but ultimately good man, someone who had been consumed by loneliness and made a terrible mistake. Others felt betrayed, their faith shaken by the revelation of his relationship with Anna. The very foundation of the church, a place of unity and trust, was now fractured, its congregation struggling to reconcile the man they had admired with the choices he had made. Anna's arrest brought no closure. During her trial, her lawyers argued that she had acted out of desperation and emotional turmoil. They painted her as a woman who had been broken by years of abuse and isolation, whose only crime was seeking solace in the wrong place. But the prosecution, led by the Mitchell family's influence, portrayed her as a manipulative force, someone who had destroyed everything she touched. As the trial unfolded, shocking truths about the Mitchell family emerged. Testimonies from former employees revealed David's abusive behavior toward Anna, corroborating her claims. Financial records exposed Caroline Mitchell's motivations to control the family estate, casting doubt on her relentless pursuit of Anna's guilt. The court of public opinion began to shift, and sympathy for Anna grew among those who saw her as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. In the end, Anna was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to a reduced prison term, but the damage was done. The town that had once judged her so harshly began to see her story in a different light, a tale of a woman caught in a web of power, abuse, and unrelenting scrutiny. Her name became synonymous with both tragedy and resilience, a reminder of how far someone can fall when the weight of their world becomes too much to bear. The Mitchell family's reputation was irreparably damaged. Caroline, faced with mounting evidence of her own deceit, retreated from public life. The estate in Charleston, once a symbol of power and prestige, now stood as a monument to greed and betrayal. St. Mary's Church remained a solemn place, its pews no longer as full as they once were. The echoes of Father Matthew's sermons still seemed to linger in the walls, a haunting reminder of the man who had tried to balance his faith with his humanity, and failed. For the town of Ravenwood, the events of that November served as a harsh but necessary lesson. Even those held in the highest regard are not immune to weakness, and the price of buried secrets is often paid in suffering. Anna, now serving her sentence, found a strange sense of peace in her confinement. Away from the judgmental eyes of the town, she reflected on her choices and the chain of events that had brought her to this point. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope, not for a return to the life she had lost, but for a chance to rebuild something new when her time was served. The townspeople, too, were left to grapple with their own roles in the tragedy. Had they been too quick to judge? Too blind to the signs of pain and turmoil that surrounded them? The answers weren't easy, but the questions remained, lingering like the shadows of the events that had unfolded. The story of Father Matthew and Anna Collins is one of love, guilt, betrayal, and the unrelenting weight of secrets. It's a cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring emotional pain and the devastating impact of judgment and power dynamics. But it's also a story about humanity, the flaws that bind us all, and the choices that can either redeem or destroy us. What do you think about this story? Was Anna a victim of her circumstances, or should she have made different choices? Do you feel sympathy for Father Matthew? Was he a man consumed by loneliness, or someone who betrayed the trust of his community? What lessons do you take away from the tragedy in Ravenwood? How can we better support those who are struggling in silence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes these stories resonate and reminds us all of the complexities of the human experience. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can uncover more hidden tales and reflect on the lessons they leave behind. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.